if you don't mind, start with what you're going to work on today when you go back to Washington. It seems for the prescription drugs issue amendment that you have there, it seems like you have some bipartisan.
Addicted is when they go in.
Well,
sometimes unbelievably worse, which has always been odd to me to figure that out, but because they can find access sometimes in the system, and then you get into this cycle of stealing and supporting the habit and back in again. And
well, yeah, and I know you've been working on this issue for a while, the reoffender issue. So let me, if you don't mind, start with what you're going to work on today when you go back to Washington. It seems for the prescription drugs issue amendment that you have there, it seems like you have some bipartisan support. So this is really not a Democrat or Republican issue. This is just a people issue, no?
yeah. Yeah, it's a people issue on substance abuse generally, how to get people working together across the aisle to solve problems. In this case, the prescription drug abuse issue is big in certain parts of Ohio. And some of those areas, like southern Ohio, where I first heard about this at a town meeting, folks can get their prescriptions filled in Ohio, come up to their limit there, and then go over to Kentucky or West Virginia and get more painkillers, other prescription drugs that they shouldn't be getting, and there's no way to monitor that. There's not a data sharing between the states. So this is an opportunity for the federal government to step in and help. And we've worked for months on this on a bipartisan basis. We've now got good legislation. And I hope that tonight we'll pass it in the Senate and get it to the President yet this week, and he's indicated he'll sign it. So this will help our law enforcement folks, help to stop the abuse of prescription drugs. The other amendment is on synthetic drugs, which is this dangerous new drug. And you've seen some of these horrific examples of what happens when people are high on this stuff. That case in Miami recently, and there's been some killings and so on. So it's a really important area for us to just get into the FDA substance abuse category called Schedule 1,
right,
where these synthetic stimulants and synthetic hallucinogens will now be treated like the dangerous drugs that they are.
Obviously, there's bipartisan support here. You're able to come together on this. If the U.S. Supreme Court strikes down the Affordable Care Act, whether it's part of it or all of it, there are 30 million people out there that need coverage. I mean, are you going to be able to come together and put together something that will work for everyone, that both parties can agree with?
I hope so. I mean, I think one of the problems with the current law is that it was pushed through the Congress, really jammed through the Senate and the House without any Republican support and therefore input. And so you end up with the country being kind of polarized about it from the start, and it also didn't deal with the cost side of things. So yeah, people are going to be provided more coverage, but at higher and higher costs. And it does affect businesses. Here in Ohio, there's small businesses who want to offer health care, but they simply don't want to bring on new employees because they don't want to have that cost of health care, be part of it. I ran into an employer here in Cuyahoga County like that who said, hey, I'm going part-time, overtime, I'm not bringing new people on when I have new business, and the main reason, healthcare costs. So I think there is a consensus among Republicans and Democrats that we got to do more to get the costs of health care down and provide more choice and more access at the same time. And that's going to be regardless of what the Supreme Court decides, by the way, because I don't believe we can afford the current law, and I don't believe that we're going to be able to afford it in terms of its impact on our economy either. So I think we're going to have to come together, and I don't know what's going to happen. Some are so sure the Supreme Court is going to say yes or say no. I don't know what they're going to do, but to me it's almost irrelevant in terms of your question, because we're still going to have to come back together and figure out how to put together something we can afford and something that really does deal with the costs of health care for families and for businesses.
There seems to be some agreement on dealing with folks who may have pre-existing conditions. Is that one of the things you think you'll be able to maybe possibly even come to agreement with before the end of the year?
Yes. Yeah. I think that's a good example of something where there's a bipartisan consensus. If you have a pre-existing condition, you should have a way to get health care coverage. And there have been lots of proposals out there. One is in the President's health care law, but others have other proposals on it, including having more state pools and to be able to keep the costs under control, but yet provide a relatively low-cost plan, sometimes a higher deductible plan, to make sure that there's a backstop for people with pre-existing conditions. So that's an example of one, I think, where you will see some consensus. I also think, you know, on this whole issue of the litigation costs in health care, although there's some people who are strongly against making any changes in it, and they say, you know, the trial bar is very powerful in Washington. That's true. On the other hand, there are states like California that have put in place some limits on not the compensatory damages you'd get if you get hurt in a medical procedure, but it's the pain and suffering, the punitive damages, to have some caps on those that have lowered the cost of health care. And that's something I think there's a consensus on it. The President's talked about it. Republicans like myself have been promoting this as one of the ways to get the cost down is to have a legal system that makes sense and get rid of some of the frivolous lawsuits and some of the costs that everybody bears.
Okay. Democrats have traditionally been kind of against something like that. Sounds like you're reaching out right now.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, the President's talked about it. He said, you know, there are some examples, California, Texas. Ohio's got some relatively new laws in place that have helped, but we still have relatively high costs on malpractice insurance, and we still have a lot of those costs passed along to those of us that have health care insurance. So I think those are common sense ideas that could get resolved and need to be addressed regardless of what the Supreme Court does this week.
Jobs. Obviously, everybody is concerned about jobs. Senator, what do you think can be done to increase more jobs so people can have access to things like health care?
Yeah. You know, what I hear all the time, and I'm going to be meeting with a group of business leaders here today at a round table, and I'm sure I'll hear the same thing, which is we need some certainty and some predictability on taxes, on regulations, on energy, on health care. You know, putting together something on the deficit and debt, because a lot of people have kept their cash on the sidelines instead of investing it in businesses and creating jobs because they're worried, understandably, that we're headed toward Greece or Spain or Italy, you know, these countries that are imploding because our debt's at historic levels and our deficits continue to be so much higher than, you know, the revenue coming in to the point that it really is scary. So I think there's some things we could do relatively quickly and on a bipartisan basis: tax reform, regulatory relief, developing energy more aggressively here in this country. We're starting to do that here in Ohio, and it's helping in terms of jobs, and dealing with the deficit and debt. And those are things that, you know, regardless of whether it's President Obama getting reelected or a new president, President Romney, and I'm supporting President Romney. I think he's got the right experience and record and plans. Regardless of who it is, we're going to have to sit down and work on these issues.
Is that your prediction? You just said you're supporting President Romney.
Yeah.
Your prediction.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said if it is a President Romney.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think, you know, I think it's going to be a close election.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Ohio is going to be key. Ohio's probably one of 10 states that'll make the difference. And I don't know what would happen if the election were tomorrow, but I think by the time Election Day comes, you know, I do think Governor Romney is likely to win Ohio and therefore likely to be our next president. But, you know, regardless of who wins, my point is that we've got to address these issues. People have looked at this year-end big tax increase issue on the debt limit coming up and said, boy, if you don't resolve this, we're going back into a recession. And this is the Federal Reserve, Chairman Bernanke, it's the Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan group. And unfortunately, I think they're right. I mean, I think if Congress is still paralyzed, you're likely to see another downgrade. We already had that once, as you know, last year in connection with the last debt limit. And you're likely to see the economy lose even more steam and put the country back into a recession. So we've got to get this issue resolved with the debt and the deficit, but also do these pro-growth things to get the economy moving so that middle-class families here in Ohio don't continue to suffer through this weak recovery. It's the weakest recovery since the Great Depression. And that's what I hear when I'm out there. I hear it from people who are fearful about keeping their jobs, people who can't seem to get a job. The average time on unemployment's at historic levels, over 40 weeks. And then I hear it from the business community, and I think I'll hear it again today, which is, gosh, we're hesitant to make the investment, take the risk, you know, hire more people because there's so much uncertainty out there, and a lot of it's because of Washington policies hurting more than it helps.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this. I asked Mr. Romney what qualities should a vice president have, And I know that you have said that you're very happy with being a senator from Ohio.
I'm fortunate to be a senator from Ohio.
But just curious, you know, on those same lines, what do you think a vice president should possess?
Oh gosh, team player. I think the most successful vice presidents have been those who aren't looking to have their own agenda, but rather pull together and work as a team. And then second is, you know, being able to work with Congress and solve these problems we talked about. I mean, you know, it takes two to tango. And right
like
now you've got kind of, you know, the executive and the legislative branches not working together. And, you know, the Democrats control the Senate, Republicans control the House. Sometimes we can work things out, but even when we can, it seems like we can't then work with the president. I think it'd be helpful to have just a better relationship between the branches to be able to solve these pressing issues that if we don't address, again, the economy is going to go even further down and we're going to have even more problems. So to be able to pass along something to our kids and grandkids that's better than what we got from our parents and grandparents, we got to figure out how to work together.
Is it fair to say you sound like you might be talking about Senator Rob Portman?
No, I'm probably best suited where I am.
So if he asked you, you'd say no?
Well, I'd say a lot of other great choices, and I'd say, look, I think I can help you a lot where I am. And I think even if you had a President Romney right now, and I think he's got better ideas and so on than our current president. In fact, I'm convinced in terms of the economy, he's got a much better plan to get the country back on track. You'd still have a real tough time getting stuff done because Congress, the House, and the Senate are not functioning like they should. And over the years, my 12 years in the House and my time in the Senate, you know, I've been able to bring people together to solve problems, and that's what we're doing today with this Second Chance Summit. It's what we're doing tonight in terms of these two amendments we talked about on the anti-drug front that I've been able to get through on a bipartisan basis. So I think I'm best suited to stay where I am.
I don't have a lot of time here, so let me begin to wrap this up. When I talked to Representative Peter King, he had told me about that Mr. Obama, President Obama, I should say, didn't really have a relationship with members of Congress. He felt it was possible a leadership issue. I mean, do you kind of feel the same way? It's a leadership thing coming from the White House? And Romney would possess those leadership qualities?
Yeah, I think one of the problems right now is that there are not strong levels of trust between the President and members of the House and Senate. And I would suggest you talk to Democrats about it, because some of them tell me that. You know, they're just, look, it's always difficult. The executive branch has their priorities, legislative branch has their priorities. Some people say that's even stronger than the Republican-Democrat differences. But you got to figure out a way to work together. And I think, you know, there could be a much better relationship and a better level of trust, and that would help us get things done.
Let me ask you about the person that you're supporting, Mitt Romney. In a recent poll, it showed that he was not doing well among Hispanic Americans, and he's also not doing well among African Americans. So do you think, well, when I went to Brunswick, when I was there, that crowd was majority white. Do you think Mitt Romney has a racial problem, a race problem, would you say?
Well, I think his message is compelling to everybody. You mentioned African Americans and Hispanics. Small business entrepreneurs, you know, most African Americans and most Hispanics work in small businesses. Culturally conservative. A lot of the African American community and certainly a lot of the Hispanic community would be closer to where Governor Romney is on those cultural issues. So I think there's a great opportunity to reach out. And look, you just, you know, you got to get the message out and tell people what you're about, not just about what's gone wrong. And let's face it, we've had a few years of real disappointments. And we do have the weakest recovery since the Great Depression. Take-home pay has gone down in Ohio over 5% for working families. I mean, we've got a lot of issues. Costs have gone up. Price of gas has almost doubled. But it's what you're going to do. And I think once the campaign moves along, you get closer to the election, I think you'll hear more and more about his message of hope. You've heard his ads about day one, this is what we're going to do. And I think whether you're African American, whether you're Hispanic, regardless of who you are, if you're an American, you're going to listen to that and say, okay, you know, I'm not crazy about the way things have gone. The country is not headed in a good direction right now, but I want to know that there is a better way. And that's what I like about Mitt Romney. He's not afraid to talk about that. Some politicians are. They don't want to talk about what they're going to do because sometimes that gets controversial. You know, he's willing to say, this is what we got to do on health care, on energy, on taxes, on regulations, and on the deficit and the debt. And I think when people hear that, and again, particularly with this focus he's got on small business, and you know, I think there's an opportunity here. I really do. And it's going to require not just the negative part and the problems we have, but again, a positive message about hope and opportunity.
Final two questions. Why should folks in Ohio, this is such an important state, support your candidate?
Well, because I think Mitt Romney's got the opportunity to turn things around because of his experience. You know, he understands how the private sector works, how you create jobs. He did a good job as governor. He saved the Olympics. His record of working with Democrats, he had an 85% Democrat legislature in Massachusetts, but he found a way to work with them. He got there, they had a big deficit, $3 billion, ended up with a rainy day fund of $2 billion, so he's worked with them to, you know, to get things done. And then finally, I like his policies better, you know, and if you're an Ohioan, you're looking at, you know, a lot of years of some tough economic times and hoping for something better in the future. And I think if you look at what he's talking about, it addresses Ohio issues squarely. I mean, we've got a big manufacturing state. He's talking about making our manufacturers competitive again. He's talking about on trade, offering more export opportunities. 25% of our factory workers make things that get exported. That's good. We want more of that. But also about being tougher with our competitors, a more level playing field, especially China. And I think a lot of people believe that. And then on the tax issue, I don't think anybody thinks our tax code works. He wants to reform it. And on health care, again, we got huge health care cost problems we're not addressing. He wants to address that. And then on energy, if you're an Ohioan, you should focus on the importance of developing our own energy because we've got these two shale finds, Marcellus and Utica, that could produce hundreds of thousands of jobs based on some of the reports I've seen. But the federal government needs to be a more helpful partner in doing that. And right now the federal government is taking the opposite position, trying to put out new regulations, a new federal overlay, and so on. And so these are differences of opinion and policy that affect us as Ohioans. And I think if people listen to the campaign and what he's talking about, they'll like what they hear.
Okay. The Supreme Court struck down most of Arizona's law regarding illegal, but a key provision was upheld, which was state and local officers, when they stop someone, if they suspect that they could be an illegal immigrant, they should check them, check their status. I don't know if you heard about this today or not, but do you have any concerns that there's that some folks who are of the Hispanic origin feel that this could, you know, ignite more racial profiling?
Yeah, I haven't read the decision.
Okay.
So I really haven't followed it, but I will say that I think every state's frustration with the federal government is real, and I think it's led to some of these state-by-state laws that shouldn't be necessary. I mean, immigration is a federal issue in the sense that controlling the border and dealing with it is, you know, shouldn't be up to the states, it should be up to the federal government. And it's out of frustration, I think, that a lot of these laws have been written. And, you know, President Obama in his campaign said he was going to do comprehensive immigration reform, send a proposal up the first year. We've never gotten it, you know, and I think this is one of these issues where we do need to address it. We need to address the border security, also interior security, because it's inadequate now. And we also need to come up with a sensible way to deal with those who are here. And that's, again, something that Romney's talked about. He'd like to do it. He gave a speech about it last week to some Latino elected officials.
Yep.
But we need somebody who's actually going to take on some of these tough issues. And I believe Mitt Romney's the guy to do that.
Okay, I believe I'm getting the high five sign.
All right.
Now I have 2 seconds to get it.